My son would not have brain damage if they listened to us and went ahead with the cesarean that we were meant to have. If they didn't take our power away, if they didn't try to manipulate and manage the whole situation. Welcome to the Jess Nahu podcast, where we delve into the heart of extraordinary stories, resilience, adversity, advocacy, special needs, birth trauma, and so much more. I'm your host, Jess Nahu. Welcome everybody to the Jess Nahu podcast. We are back again for another episode today, and it is again another story of real, raw and unfiltered real life stories. And today I'm going to share a little bit more about Hawaiki and his birth. And you will just start to see, I guess, and understand the transparency of these events that happened. So I think we left off on our last episode was that he basically was taken to NICU after everything that happened. And so, yeah, he was taken to NICU and he was really struggling to breathe. And he was put on oxygen and CPAP immediately. And as I explained in the last episode, he wasn't caught. He landed on his head. And because of that, they decided to do an ultrasound of the brain. And there was bleeding. He was bleeding inside his head. So because of that, they had to give him also a blood transfusion immediately. So he was given a blood transfusion to try and help with the blood loss that he'd already had from that fall. But there was always so much more that happened as well, and that I have to be just careful of what I share. And because so much had happened, like it was touch and go. Whilst I know he was alive now, but it was really, really hard, and it was really touch and go. I remember when we finally brought Vera in to see him, and she was just so beautiful. I can just see the images now in my head. And she was like, "That's my baby. That's my baby." And it was so beautiful to see, and it just brought this sense of happiness and calmness through all the craziness, all the scariness, all of the stuff that was happening to him. But she's like the glue for our family, that little girl. She is the one that keeps everything together, still to this day. Believe me, still to this day. So after that had happened and he was given the blood transfusion, he was in NICU. We did not leave his side. My son hit the floor via his head when he was born. So the lack of trust in anyone had completely gone. We really struggled with the whole situation of going, this has really happened to our little boy. And so normally in, NICU or any ICU setting, that it's the ICU nurses, they come over, take over, they look after your child all night, but we just would not leave his side. So whilst I was still on the ward because of just giving birth and just a few little complications with me, I needed to be attended to. And my husband, he was staying there every single night with him. So he was on the good old, the breastfeeding fold out seat couch somewhat, and he was sleeping on that every single night. And then after I think it was about 3 days, I was discharged and I was going home at night to try and sleep, but not that I could because I was up all hours of pumping. And that was one other thing I remember. He was at about 2 days old and they were like, he's just weird, because my milk hadn't fully come in yet and they wanted him on something, and so they were like, we're going to start giving him formula if your milk doesn't come in. So I remember drastically scrambling to try and find donated milk, and we found some, and we did the drive down to Coolangatta, and my husband did the drive down to Coolangatta. I was still in hospital. and he got some milk for Hawaiki. So that was another issue. But once he'd started on that, then we could, it was just feeling a bit better, I guess. And then once my milk came in, then I was pumping left, right and centre, because I was just going to hound it as hard as I could just to give him every possible chance. And that was my biggest thing. As a mum, experiencing like unimaginable events happen to your baby. My biggest motto, and still to this day, is I will do everything in my power to give him the best possible chance at life. And during those, the first probably 36 hours, I knew something else was wrong. And I just kept saying to them, like, there's something wrong. He was only sleeping 20-minute increments. Like, I was like, there's something wrong. Something is wrong. But, they keep reassuring you that this is normal due to the fall and other things that had happened around birth. But I just knew, like, my motherly instinct knew something was wrong. So it was about, day 3. And I remember we had stepped outside to the Ronald McDonald House just to have a coffee. And I think we were talking to some other parents there. And we were gone for about 45 minutes. And we came back in. And there's my baby attached to all of these attachments on his head, these lines. There was like a video camera on him. There was a screen watching him. And I was like, what is going on? What is happening to my son? And they were like, we've decided to put an EEG on him to monitor his brain. And Hawaiki is having seizures back to back. And from memory, I remember all these little signs as well. Like I got videos of him. It was his right side, and his right leg and arm would do circles. And that was a seizure. So then they had to figure out what the right dosage was of, medication to give him to try and settle and stop these seizures. And that process was quite a bit. And so they really, really loaded him with a lot of stuff to really calm it down because of the brain stuff that had happened previously to that. This was going to really affect him. So once that was sorted, but then there was also the issue of that because of the scenarios at birth, he had to have an MRI of his brain to see where we were at, to see what damage had been done, to see what was going to happen, to try and understand what was happening with him. But because he was on CPAP and oxygen, he couldn't go for an MRI, so we had to wait for that to settle down. And I think it was about day 5 of his life that, he went for that MRI. And taking your baby for an MRI and leaving them in that machine was so hard. I remember me and my husband sitting there and I was like saying to him, this is like, I'm not doing okay. This is not good because of the lack of trust that we'd had from everything that had happened. We just didn't trust anybody. We couldn't, believe in anybody. We couldn't put our trust in them for our boy. So that was really hard. But he had it. And then it was, I don't know, might have been 24 hours later. Maybe 2 days. I think it might have been a couple of days. And the results had come back and we were just anxiously waiting, just praying that everything was going to be okay. And we were taken into a room, and I still remember the NICU head person who took us into the room, and we sat on these couches, and I'm just anxiously waiting. I could feel my fingers moving and wanting to know what had happened. And we were told that your son has brain damage. But it's going to be okay. He's going to be okay. We reckon he's going to be okay. But your son has mild to moderate brain damage. And I remember after that, I couldn't even think. Being told your little boy has brain damage. Like, it seems like there's nothing else going on in the world. It's like time stops. And she asked me, "Oh, do you have any questions?" And I was like, I don't think I can think right now. I don't think that I even understand what is happening. Everything seemed like a blur. I do remember asking my husband, "Do you have any questions?" And he was like, "No." I said, "I'm sure that we will come back with questions. I'm sure that when we can think, we can." But it's like time just stood still. Your son has brain damage. And knowing that this was caused by them, that the actions that were taken that day, it changed his life forever. He has to live with this for his entire life. Because when there is brain damage, we can't take that away. We can try and improve outcomes and give them everything we possibly can. But when someone or something causes your child brain damage, it's there. And it's always going to be there. So that was the hardest thing, I think, hearing. And I just had a memory, though, of even before that, of having your baby in NICU, being on oxygen, CPAP, all the damage that had been done leading up to this. And I think it was the day that I'd finally gone home. So I probably would have been walking in to the hospital early, day 4, that morning of his life. And I remember looking down and just looking up to the sky as I'm walking into the hospital going, "Please, please, please wake up from this nightmare. This has to be a dream. This has to be a nightmare. Please, can you wake me up right now? Because I don't want to go through this anymore." But I didn't wake up. The little boy was still in NICU. And our lives had been shattered. His life had been changed. And I never, ever wish this upon anyone. I honestly don't. So after that, then we were still in NICU for another few days. He was in there for about 7 to 8 days. Things had started to settle, I guess, once the medication was starting to stop the seizures, and he was somewhat stable. He got put back on CPAP and oxygen on and off. He was taken off the CPAP and then he was just on oxygen at one stage. And so, yeah, after about 7, 8 days, we'll then move to special care. And we desperately just wanted him to get better. And it felt, I guess, like he was getting stronger, being moved from NICU to special care. So it, gives you some belief that it's going to be okay. And then we were in there for about 3 weeks. And I just remember the process of being in there, and there was a particular comment from the head nurse she must have been the manager running it. And she'd said to me, so the obstetric team just want to make sure everything's okay and we can move forward from this whole situation. And I was like, I don't fucking think so. Because everything had just started really playing into my brain of what had actually gone on. Because when you're in there and you're honestly just fighting for your child and praying that he's going to be alive, you don't start processing anything at all that had just happened. And so by, I think, day 8, 9, 10, somewhere, and then I was like, something's not right. Like, this is not right. And I had been asking for a debrief from the obstetrician, but it just wasn't happening. And yeah, I was like, this is not right. So I'd also made the decision that I'm going to speak to some lawyers, because I think the fact that your child has brain damage from the whole scenario of happened from them controlling it when we asked for specific things. And if those specific things would have happened, none of this would have happened. My son would not have brain damage if they listened to us and went ahead with the cesarean that we were meant to have. Hear that again. My son would not have brain damage if they listened to us, if they didn't take our power away, if they didn't try to manipulate and manage the whole situation. But they didn't listen to us. They didn't even read our file properly. They just took it into their own control and took our power away. So I went and saw some lawyers, and yeah, we have a case against the hospital for medical negligence. So my son has now been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And that is from them. That is on them. And I have this fire inside of me to fight for what is right for my son. But this isn't just for him. This is for so many other families that I know of, and so many that I don't know of, that have been through hell from this hospital and cause medical negligence on their child. Like, my child has a neurological diagnosis because of their actions. So everything that I'm doing is to fight for what is right and to stand up for what is right and for our babies' lives. Because this stuff shouldn't be happening. Parents, my biggest thing is that parents need to be listened to. And I still remember when I finally got a debrief with, I think it was about 3 weeks after. And again, we wouldn't leave Hawaiki by himself. So I got my best friend to come in and look after him and look for him when we were having that meeting. And I remember saying to that obstetrician, I was like, you didn't understand what we were asking. And she said to me, you need to understand that I only knew you 20 minutes prior to meeting you. And I said, exactly. And this is the problem. The fact that you only knew me 20 minutes prior and you can only skim on my notes, not look into anything, This is the problem, and this is what has to change within the hospital system. There needs to be some other structure, systems put into place for parents that are going inside that hospital to have their baby, so that the people that are looking after them, number one, know their full, entire background of what has happened, and number two, to listen to the parents, because the parents are the ones that have lived through the entire pregnancy, not you. No matter what your education is, you don't know what entirely has happened during this pregnancy. So this is why I'm standing up for what is right. Because parents need to be listened to and not ignored. They're the ones that know. Their instinct is on point, not yours. And so after Hawaiki was in hospital for, I think it was about 4 weeks, so we got to go home. And so much happened after then as well. There is such a huge story. But I'm going to wrap it up today on that this was what had happened within the first 4 weeks of his life. And we went home, but so much more is to follow. So keep your eyes and ears peeled, because I'm going to slowly just bring out all the stories about what has happened. And because I believe stories need to be told so people can listen and hear our stories. And I will probably have these moments of the raw and realness every time. And it still breaks me, and it always will. I can't take that away. Whilst I've done the work to be able to handle it, and I can get through it a lot quicker than what I used to be able to. And that's why I've also created the Survival of Birth Trauma for mums, parents, anyone who has been through birth trauma and knows that they need help then and there, to have the tools and techniques to just bring you out of that and just try and settle the nervous system and calm you and ground you just for a little bit to get through the state of overwhelm, the state of anxiety. This is why it's been created. So I hope you enjoyed our session today. It was real and raw. And listen for more, because we've got a lot more coming up. But thank you all for joining me today for the Jess podcast. And if you can do me a huge favour, if you could rate our podcast, that will get us spread to more people and keep us on here. We will be greatly appreciative if you could just rate us, because we're here for the realness, we're here for the rawness, and we're here to empower you, because anything is possible. See ya.